I'll call to order the September meeting of the Finance Committee. We have 3 of the 4 committee members here today, Mr. McIntosh and Mr. Taylor. Ms. Adams is out of town today and will not be here. And we also have, looks like 4 other council members, so the whole council here except for Ms. Adams. With that, we will begin with the consent agenda. Are there any items anyone would want pulled from consent?
Chairman, could you pull C9?
C9. Mayor, I didn't recognize you. We thank you for being here. Sure. Any others? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the balance.
Second.
We have a motion second to approve the balance of the consent agenda. If the committee will please vote when it comes up. Thank y'all very much. That is approved. We will now, wait a minute, I just hit the wrong button. We will now go to C9. If the clerk will please read this.
Item C9, consideration of items regarding the donation from the Winston-Salem Police Foundation.
Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the Police Foundation for this amazing contribution to our city and the work that they recognize what we're trying to do in downtown and other areas and the equipment that they're going to buy from funds that they've raised through fundraisers they've had during the year. I really do appreciate the work of the foundation. Another great example is this summer they had that summer athletic league and baseball league, and so they're doing a lot of good things with it. I don't know if there's any representatives here.
Your representative here?
Assistant Chief Manny is here.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor, members of the City Council. So, yes, the Winston-Salem Police Foundation, they don't have any members here today. They did attend yesterday to the Public Safety Committee meeting, and they thought that they were going to get the opportunity then. They were gracious enough to donate $100,000 to the police department, and as you can see, they're committed to our community and the police department and our staff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Motion for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion second to approve C9. If the committee will please vote when it comes up. And that is approved. Thank you very much. That concludes the consent agenda. We will now go to the general agenda. I will tee up the first, the city clerk will please read it first. We'll get it in there.
Item G1, information on LED street lighting conversion.
I had a teaser ad at the last council meeting, let everybody know that Duke Energy was going to come today and give us some information on what I think will be an exciting and profitable product for the city, and that is the conversion of approximately 25,000 high-pressure sodium street lights to LEDs. With that, Jimmy Flife, I see you out there. I'll just recognize you first, and you can introduce the folks that are with you. And, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark and all council members. Glad to be with you all today, and I did bring reinforcements today as I am not a subject matter expert on lighting. Tracy Kendrick, who's up here with me, is our lighting manager for the northern region. I think basically stretches from about Durham to Wilkes County, to Mount Airy in north. And then Felicia Wright is one of our senior engineering designers that works in Tracy's group, and she's located here in the Triad. So just wanted to share a little bit of information, give you a little bit of history. You know, we've just finished earlier this year a conversion of all of the mercury vapor lights that have been being phased out over time. Lindsay Smith, your energy manager, and I had been talking. Lindsay had recognized that, I think it was about 10 years ago that we came before council and kind of let you know that as those lights failed, we'd be changing them out with, and I think at that time we were changing them to high pressure sodium because we could no longer get them. And then several years later, the LED light became the standard. And so now I think all of the city's mercury vapor lights have been changed to LED. I'm sure some of you all have probably heard pros and cons. Some people think they're a little bit too bright, but I think personally, I live in Winston-Salem as well, and I'm walking my dog in the evening in my neighborhood in Old Sherwood Forest. I do like the LED lights. So we've completed that project. And then the high-pressure sodium lights were phased out, I guess, about a year ago as well, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, that they're no longer available, and the LED is really the only standard. And then when we looked at this transition to LED lighting, the company recognized that a lot of the high-pressure sodium lights still had a longer life left in them. And so there's a fee to change those proactively. But as those high-pressure sodium lights fail, they are changed out with a LED light as well. So you've got a little bit of mix in a lot of neighborhoods as these have been changed over time. And I know I spoke with Councilmember Clark and Assistant City Manager Aaron as well regarding the potential to change all the lights. And some cities have done this. I know one of the reasons I asked Tracy to come up is the city of Durham's one that he worked with directly, and they changed all of their high-pressure sodium lights to LEDs about 2 years ago. Each city, the way they did lighting is a little bit different. Tracy and I were talking, and in the case of Durham, he said many years ago the city of Durham made a decision to install a lot of high wattage lights. So they had a high number of 250-watt high-pressure sodium lights. And as the larger lights get up, the delta between the cost of a new LED and an existing high-pressure sodium light is greater. So their savings was a little bit different kind of number. The city of Winston-Salem has a large quantity of just the very basic, what we call a NEMA headlight with just a little plastic globe that hangs down. And so the delta between those is a little bit less. Lindsay Smith and I have been talking some, your city energy manager, and Lindsay's done some really detailed calculations and has come up with, based on what we know today, current rates, and things are constantly changing with fuel riders and then rate cases that's coming up. We'll have a new rate case that's coming up that'll change things a little bit going forward. But based on what we know today, the savings for the city to change all of the high-pressure sodium lights, which I think it's 25,038 or something like that, but just north of 25,000 lights, the savings would be about $73,000 a year. The one-time fee to convert all of those lights is a little over $900,000. So it'll take a little time. But there's a lot of factors in there, some of the things you don't know with some of the energy costs that are going to change and go away over time. Some of that will change as we go forward. So it's hard to say, over the next 10 or 13 years. I think based on what we know today, Lindsay's calculation was it'd take about 13 years for a full payback. But some of the cost with the fuel riders and some of the income tax credits that's in the bills now, like I said, the rates get very complicated when we kind of go through all of that. But there's a potential that the savings will be greater down the road. And so with that, I'll ask Tracy if he wants to share anything that he may know just to kind of share about the transition and how he would do that. I will say one of the things Duke Energy is doing with the cities is you can pay that fee to transition all the lights over a 4-year time period. So once we receive payment, that first, if you wanted to do it over time, we would go ahead and start the project and start ordering materials and lights, and we would do that change out as quickly as we could. Tracy can speak more to it, but I think it probably would take us about a year to change all 25,000 lights. That's based on being able to get the crews and the material. As you all have known, sometimes labor is difficult sometimes to come by these days, as well as some supply chain issues, but we think we could do it in about a year, and then you would pay that annual fee over 4 years to pay the lump sum up front. Tracy, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Jimmy. Have been doing this for quite a while and worked with multiple municipalities to get this conversion worked out. And we have evolved over time, and we've gotten better at what we do, because when we first started this in Durham, North Carolina, it was the first one we'd ever done. And so as you do different projects and as you move forward, you get better at those projects. And so we have gotten to the point now where we know how to do these transitions. We know how to make sure that the municipality that we're working with is getting the best bang for their buck as we move forward and as we do these transitions. And so when we come into your city, if you decide to do so, and we transition our HID, which is our high pressure sodium and those type lights, to a LED, then we'll do it in a manner that is a lot more efficient than we have done in the past. And so saying that, if you give us the approval to do so, then we'll start a process. We'll get these things in place, and we'll start transitioning your lights. with the city of Durham, we learned a lot of things. We had a lot of the same media attention that you guys have seen, and I read the article that was put in your local paper, and, you know, to everybody's surprise, the deer didn't leave, the honeybees kept making honey, and our birds didn't fly into things and go into non-existence. And so I think that a lot of the things that we have as deterrents have been shown over the past to not really be deterrents. The people who write these articles not only are writing these articles to make sure that we're all informed and we don't do anything that's not informative, but they also put LED lights in their house. And so their sleep patterns haven't changed. Their issues haven't changed. But we continue to move forward and technology continues to get better so that we can save money, you can save money, and we give a better product to our customer. And so that's one of the main things that I'd like to share with you guys is that with all of the media interruption, with all of the media questions, is I think that we're in a place now where we can say none of this stuff is happening, or a lot of this stuff's not happening. And so with that, I'm going to leave it up to you guys to ask me questions because I really don't know what's on your mind. And until I hear your questions, I can't surmise what you want to ask.
I do have two questions, and I did get a partial answer from, by the way, Tiffany Oliva is the staff person heading this up. Will you please comment on the 40-watt fixtures? Because I have had complaints of existing LEDs that they say they're too bright, and they're 50, and 40 is the next size down. And I've got an email that says you're working with the State Utilities Commission, but can you just kind of tell us all about that?
Certainly. Mr. Clark, I don't know that they're too bright. I think they're a different color light. When we went from mercury vapor lamps, and I've been at Duke Energy for 34 years, a mercury vapor lamp was a blue-white light that was put in people's yards, put on streets and things of that nature. LED is a bright white light, and the wattage is the same, and typically the coverage is the same. And so when you move from 40-watt mercury vapor to 40-watt LED, you're getting the same wattage. I don't think you're getting a brighter light. And so the 40-watt is a offering that we're putting before the Utilities Commission, and I don't know how many of you guys have been in neighborhoods where we have the 8-foot post-top lights, but
Those are the decorative ones.
the decorative
Yes.
ones.
That's
they're-
my next question.
Yeah, so the decorative 50-watt, 8-foot mountain height, and I call it a pedestrian light. I don't call it a street light. It was put in place years ago, and it was very popular, but it was mainly for pedestrians. And we don't have an equivalent LED to replace that post-op lamp. And so our proposal to the Utility Commission was to get a 40-watt or a 30-watt LED so that we could replace those. I have not been part of the Utility Commission negotiations. I don't know if we're going to get a 40-watt street light Cobra or not. I think my personal opinion is the 40-watt and the 30-watt LED are going to be more for the 8-foot post-top lamp.
Let me ask you about that, because we
Yes,
call
sir.
those decorative lights here. Do you have a bulb that you simply replace those, or is it a fixture involved? And how complicated is that replacement?
The 8-foot post-top lamp, we don't have an equivalent for. And so when we get recommendations to change those, then what we've been doing is either going to a 12-foot light that'll give you the maximum amount of coverage with the LED equivalent. And that's, again, the reason why we're asking for the 40 and the 30 is so that we can just go out there and change the decorative fixture to a fixture that is equivalent to that 50-watt mercury vapor post-top lamp.
But for our purposes, those would be excluded for the current time, the decorative lights?
That is correct. When we give you a price associated with changeouts, it excludes the decorative fixtures.
Okay. Does anybody know, Tiffany, do you know what, of the 25,000 we have, how many are decorative?
We've got about 2,500 that are decorative lights.
Okay.
They're all on the 12-foot poles.
Okay, all righty. Okay.
So we have an equivalent for that.
So you do have an equivalent for that, and that's just changing the bulb out?
Yes,
Okay, that's a little easier than putting a new arm up.
that is correct.
Okay, good. And I do know, I was going to ask you about the Utilities Commission. The State Utilities Commission and Duke Energy together negotiate rates, and they're doing that right now, and you're not going to go out on a limb and predict what the new rates will be. I'm not going to ask you that, because you would make the paper with that comment.
I can say that I have seen what our electric utility rates are proposed to be. And in the DEP territory where they're doing their negotiations, it's 9.9%. I will go out on a limb and say that.
And by the way, for those folks, the eastern part of the state is Duke Energy Progress, which used to be Progress Energy before they merged, and that's on a different rate schedule than our part of the state, which is Duke Energy.
That is correct.
And you say they just negotiated a 9.9%.
That is correct.
So if we
And that was just for the electric rates, not for the lighting rates.
okay, but you could assume that ours will be close to 9.9%, but you're not going to go out on that limb.
You're correct.
Okay, all right. I will no longer badger the witness in that area. Any other questions, comments, Ms. Scipio?
Other than cost savings per year that the city, I guess, would realize from the switch to LED, what are the impacts on the climate that we would benefit from with that kind of switch to LED?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joynes, members of the committee and council.
Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the possibility of converting these high-pressure sodium to LED lights do present a good opportunity for us to make a dent in that November 2020 resolution with a target of 40% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2025. So Lindsay provided me with some numbers. Our street lights in 2021 required 20 million kilowatt hours of electricity, and that represented half of the city's non-utilities electric consumption. So if all of these lights that are remaining are converted, electricity use would be reduced by about 10 million kilowatt hours per year. So that's about half of that kilowatt hour usage. So this has a possibility of creating an overall 25% reduction in the city's non-utilities electric energy requirements.
Thank you.
For those that went on the bus tour, the utilities department is a huge user of electricity because all the water we drink is pumped up from the Yadkin River, and the sewer plants have to pump it back down to the river. But excluding that, the other half, we're talking about a significant reduction. Thank you. Any other question, comments, Mr. Mundy?
Thank you for that information, and I realize that with the change in to LED lights, you have discovered that some of these fears have not come to pass. When folks read that in the newspaper, however, they're going to take that to heart and consider that there are some dangers. If you all do have any studies or any histories that you can share with us, perhaps from Durham, that we can have on hand when we do get those complaints or those concerns.
If I may respond briefly to that question. So I do know with the conversion that occurred in Durham, they had, it was 20,400 lights that were converted, and they had 211 location-specific complaints related to brightness, glare, or color temperature, but that only represented 1% of the complaints. So we do have a lot that we can look to for Durham for how to address those issues.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
A lot of the issues that we had in Durham with an HID light, which is high pressure sodium mercury vapor or something of that nature, they have a burnout ratio. And so the longer they're in place, the more they degrade.
They degrade over time is what
They do. And so with an LED, once it turns on, it's going to be the same brightness it is from now until it dies, which is typically 25 to 30 years. And so unless there's a failure within the light itself where a group of lights don't work anymore, then that bright white light is always going to be there. And that's where we run into our issues is people had gotten accustomed to having an HID light, a high pressure sodium lamp at the end of their driveway, and it had dimmed over time. Maybe they moved in with a dim light, and then we put a LED up, and it feels like it's a bright white light intruding on their property. And so the city, in instances where they needed public safety on roadways, on streets, and things of that nature, they didn't waver. They said, this is a public safety issue. And they put those lights out there, and they left those lights out there. In areas, there were neighborhoods that they could back off a little bit. We went to 3,000 Kelvin, and so we would change those out to a 3,000 Kelvin, which is a softer, whiter light. And I think there's a rule within the city of Winston-Salem, and Duke Energy is already going to start out with 3,000 Kelvin versus the 4,000 Kelvin that the city of Durham put in. And so we should have less issues in Winston-Salem than we had in Durham. Mr. Mundy, anything else?
That's it. That answers it. Thank you.
All right. And we will work with you guys. We have direct contacts with our group and your city council and everybody else to try to help alleviate those issues if y'all have any.
Thank you. Ms. Scipio.
Just wanted to get clarification on the whole project and whether I heard it correctly. And I know we probably haven't locked in all of the fees, et cetera.
This is just information.
For information, but did we say that, did I hear that it's a $9,000 fee to convert to LED?
900,000.
900,000.
It's $37.
$6 per unit. $36 per unit.
$36 per light.
That we would be paying out, we could pay out over 4 years.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if I heard when we start the project, when would it be completed?
Okay. Right now, again, we're evolving. Duke Energy's evolving. We're learning things. We're working on things. When we first started this project, we were still doing the mercury vapor project. And we had additional crews that we could throw at the lighting changeouts. The Utility Commission says we should be done with those mercury vapor changeouts by the end of 2023. Those crews are going to go away. And so I won't have the ability to utilize those. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. The good thing is we'll be able to go into a neighborhood, set up a grid, do the surveys, make sure that you guys get the change outs correctly, make sure that the billing is done correctly and all of that, along with getting the change out completed. And so I think if I had to guess it, I'm going to just use some numbers because budget season is usually in June. Let's say you guys approved it in June of 2024. We could be completed with the whole project in December of 2024. So it would be about a 6-month process to get it all inspected, get it all done. If you'd done it sooner, I think we may be able to beat the 6-month process, but I want to continue to hold on to the 6-month process.
Okay, thank you. This is just for information only. I would recommend the staff to continue to work with Duke Energy to get detailed questions. I am eagerly awaiting for the Utilities Commission in Raleigh to set new rates, which will be helpful so we know exactly what we're dealing with, and also to know if they actually do approve the 40-watt conversion.
I'll take that as a takeaway.
Okay, but with that, Jimmy, you'll continue to work with Mr. Leva, and we will go.
Sure will. Thank y'all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We may need to slip out, so thank you.
You go right ahead. Have a great day. Thank y'all for being here today. All right, if the city clerk please read G2.
Item G2, resolution approving modifications to eligibility criteria for financial assistance under the Revitalizing Commercial Areas program.
Mr. Millett?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, members of council. This item was last presented last fall in Finance Committee as an information item. The detailed report was presented and discussed at that time. But just as a general recap, as you'll remember, this program was originally established in 2006 to provide low-interest loans and forgivable loans to properties in eligible areas to encourage their investment in their own properties and improve the overall aesthetic of the area. There have been 4 rounds of funding since 2006. Most recently, $2 million from the 2018 general obligation bonds were approved. Of that, approximately $1.6 million remains. It was noted by council that perhaps the status of several of the commercial areas has evolved since the original evaluation was done. So Amy Crum with Planning and Development Services and her staff did conduct a new analysis, and I'll ask her to share that process with you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, members of council, mayor. So the site analysis that we did in the planning department was basically happened between January and February of 2021. And similar to what initially done in 2006, we looked to our area plans for guidance on how and what areas to look at. And we used activity centers, which are defined in those area plan updates and that have all been adopted by this board. And then we took it one step further. In 2006, we used Growth Management 1 and 2 activity centers. We expanded out to include Growth Management 3, so it includes the entire city now. And we went from 30 activity centers that we reviewed to 46 activity centers that we reviewed. We tried to keep the analysis similar, sort of in process. So we looked at things like location, current zoning and current use, area plan recommendations. We looked at site conditions. These would include things like the presence and condition of signage, the presence and condition of vegetation, fencing, lighting, the parking areas themselves, and also the presence of any trash, graffiti, or junk cars. And we also looked at building conditions, such as broken or boarded up windows or doors, the condition of the facade, the foundations, and the roofs as much as we could tell, as well as also the presence of vacancies within the activity centers themselves. We looked at access in terms of number of access points, number of curb cuts, the width of the curb cut, if it was a huge, wide stretch of curb cut or individualized. Also, the presence of street yards. We also looked to our transportation department and the comprehensive transportation plan and included recommendations from those plans. We looked at the presence of active mobilities, such as transit, sidewalks, bike lanes. We got crime statistics from the police department, incorporated that as well. And this go around, which wasn't included the last time in 2006, we looked at investment, both private and public investment. We used, for public investment, that was RUCA funds or CRBA funds. And then for private, we used construction permits from the years 2018 to 2020. And through that, we basically rated each activity center on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 being most in need, 2 being in need, 3 being average, 4 being above average condition, and then 5 being least in need. And you can see the breakdown of these activity centers on the map on page 6 in the main document. We basically stated that if it was rated 1, 2, or 3, we would recommend those for eligibility in the program. If it was rated 4 or 5, we would recommend them not being eligible in the program. out of the 46, 25 were recommended for eligibility, and 21 were recommended not to be eligible in the program.
By the way, I'm in Exhibit B in our things. There's a map with color-coded. Continue, please.
That's all I had. I'll
Okay.
answer any questions if you have about the process.
All right. Ken?
So after it was presented as an information item, we took the comments that we heard from you then. We then had subsequent meetings with council members who had expressed interest in providing additional comment through the process. And before I get to the recommendations, I will mention one in particular that we were not able to incorporate and explain why. The question was asked by a couple of folks about, are there areas of Tier 4 or Tier 5 communities that could be made eligible? We did look into it. The justifying statute for these funds was community development and blight reduction. Because of that, it is hard to justify blight reduction being in an area designated as 4 or 5. So I did want to acknowledge we did hear that feedback, but could not incorporate that into the recommendations. So what did we incorporate? As Amy mentioned, includes that those rated as tiers 1, 2, and 3 be eligible for funding, that commercial properties within 200 feet of the boundaries of 1, 2, and 3 be included, so that you might get some adjacent properties, nearby properties that are in the same condition, whose improvement actually benefits the core of that entire activity center. So it does broaden eligibility. Property owners must be in good standing with the city, cannot be delinquent on property taxes paid to us if they've received financial assistance from us in the past. You cannot be in default. You cannot be delinquent on the repayment of other assistance. Then the last recommendation is that 10% of the remaining funds actually be used for improvements in the public right-of-way. So public improvements within eligible areas. That is something that was also a part of earlier rounds of the program that we are looking to add with this one. So if this is approved by council, we'll work with marketing and communications on an outreach program for those that would be eligible to apply for funds. My last note will be that, as always, any specific request for the use of these funds does need to be approved by City Council.
Okay. Questions or comments? Mr. McIntosh?
Do these funds carry any sort of a time limit on them? Is there a shot clock involved should somebody receive funds to do a project?
If the question is the use of the 2018 bond fund dollars, I do not know the answer to the expiration of the use of those funds. In terms of funds that are committed to a specific project, we have taken back funds before from projects that did not move forward, but for any subsequent projects, we will certainly include specific language that there is a sunset on that commitment.
And that could be done at the time when that project comes to council for final approval?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd like to see that. I think that's prudent for us to do.
Ms. Scipio, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes. We only, correct me, we have $1.6 million in the total fund. Is that what I heard?
Yes, ma'am.
No additions, and that's carryover money from an appropriation some years ago, right?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
And it's exclusively for economic development activities?
Yes, ma'am.
And it can be a loan or forgivable?
Correct.
At some point in time?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So we're tweaking, this isn't a new program, we're tweaking it.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Oh, excuse me, Ms. Burke, you wait.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Mr. Millett, as you may recall, I met with you and your team to discuss the RUCA project that is on the agenda item, and I made you aware then that areas that are listed right here are areas that I'm not in 100% support of. So we were going to take a ride and identify areas that meet the criteria of activity centers, blight, lighting, and that never happened. So Chair Clark, I have to ask, is this a time-sensitive issue? If not, I would like to ask you and your committee if we can hold this until we can have the meeting and the tour that we were scheduled to have, that we discussed having, because I'm not in support of the areas, all of the areas that are listed for the Northeast Ward. And as I have said, I have some other suggestions that are coming from the constituents in the Northeast
So
Ward.
you have some other areas you'd like to be considered?
And some of these I don't support that are listed, yes.
Okay. Well, the ordinance is already in place, so if we don't do anything, the current ordinance stays in place, correct?
The current program, yes, sir.
Stays in place. How long do you think it would take for you two to get together?
We should be able to bring back during the next cycle in October.
So if we can schedule before then.
I don't mind holding a
Yeah,
committee for
okay.
a month because it's already in place. We're just
Yeah.
tweaking. Yes, Ms. Scipio?
One question, the maps that are included, are they the new ward maps, or were they the old ward maps? If they're not the new ward maps, then I think they need to be adjusted to reflect that.
Okay, we'll make sure that they do reflect the current boundaries, yes, ma'am.
Without objection, I'll hold it in committee. Councilmember Burke's going to get up with Mr. Miller and look at some things. We're going to be sure we got the current ward maps on here, and until then, the current plan stays in place.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ken.
We will now go to G3.
Item G3, consideration of items related to an agreement for construction of Truist Stadium MLB upgrades with Frank L. Bloom Construction Company, WC Construction Company, located in the Northwest Ward.
Mr. Rao.
Good afternoon.
You going to talk?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, members of City Council. Just trying to queue up the.
You reminded me of the Senate Minority Leader.
Wow. Oh, no.
Had a pause there. I didn't know what was going on.
Well, I was looking down. I wasn't staring out.
Okay, all right.
Tough crowd.
Yeah. Please continue.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I wanted to bring up the council action to show the table on the second page. So back in 2020, Major League Baseball basically took over all levels of professional baseball in the country. And as part of that, they went through what was called a contraction at the time, and a number of communities lost their minor league baseball teams. We were fortunate that that the Winston-Salem Dash did receive what's called a professional development license and was able to continue to play. As part of what Major League Baseball put in place, they had a vision for improving player development. And so they were looking to elevate and standardize player facilities at the remaining minor league ballparks across the country. And so they carried out an assessment process to look at these minor league ballparks. It involved a scoring methodology, and the Dash went through that. And the goal was to bring down the number of points that you were assessed, with the goal of having those points down to virtually zero by a particular timeline. In our case, the goal is to try to bring that score down by opening day of 2024. Last year, you all awarded contracts to Walter Robbs, Callahan and Pierce Architects, and Frank L. Bloom Construction to put together the project team for the construction manager at risk method that we were going to use to implement the upgrades that Major League Baseball was requiring of Truist Stadium. We've gone through that design process. It involves a number of improvements to the facility, mainly making the home and visitor team clubhouses basically the same, providing for separate facilities for female coaches and staff, providing for covered batting cages, and in the case of Truist Stadium, also raising the height of the right field corner. Back in, as part of the 2022-2023 budget, you all approved $5 million for the project. The design was concluded in June, and Frank L. Bloom recently concluded the bidding for the project and has prepared what's called the guarantee maximum price for the project. And the proposed GMP, as we call it, totals $5,144,211. The table that we provided in the council action shows you the breakdown of the overall project cost. So the GMP is just one component of that cost. And I do want to point out, kind of go through it in detail. Our typical methodology when it comes to budgeting for capital projects is kind of what I call a 10-80-10 methodology. 10% of the total budget for design, 80% for construction, and then 10% for overall project contingency. So you can see the breakdown in the $5 million there. And then you can see there the estimated costs. We had to do some redesign work after we had to change our plans for designing the administration building that the DASH was also looking to do as part of this larger project. And you all approved that change order last month. Then you've got the GMP amount of $5.1 million, and I'll talk a little bit more about what's driving the increase there. And then almost $800,000 in other project costs or contingency. That, again, captures the overall project contingency that the city is going to have for the project. It also includes almost $300,000 for Wi-Fi upgrades that were also cited as part of MLB's assessment of the stadium. That project is, I think, basically completed. That was accomplished over the course of this past season. So the total cost of the project is a little over $6.6 million, so a $1.6 million increase over the original approved budget. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's driving the increase, but I'm going to talk it in general terms. Ken McDaniel with Walter Robbs, Callahan and Pierce, and Will Smeltzer with Frank L. Bloom are here, and they're prepared to give you a more in-depth explanation for what's driving the cost. And we do have a rendering or a drawing here that we can show you that hopefully kind of highlights, where we experienced some challenges.
Can you put that on the screen?
Yes, sir. Can we get the document, Ken? So I'll recognize them in one moment.
Not on our screens in front of us.
It's got to go
There we
all the way
There
to
we
the satellite
got
and
it.
back. You got to be patient. I've learned that. There we go.
So to really summarize, two factors driving the $1.6 million increase. Basically, this project has been impacted by construction inflation. About 12 to 15% is what the industry has been experiencing over the last 18 months. And then also the complexity of the project has increased. When preliminary work was done to prepare the $5 million budget, there was some pre-design work that was done by Pendulum, which was a company that has worked in the ballpark industry for some time, has a lot of experience in that area, but it was truly kind of pre-designed conceptual work. And as we actually got into the design work in earnest, a lot of challenges were discovered. There was a stormwater management system that we discovered that wasn't reflected in the pre-design that needed to be avoided. There was some utility easement that we could not impact. And just in looking at the space, the original pre-design really was trying to focus on how we could utilize the existing space in the stadium, and it was determined that we would have to go beyond that. And so there's more structural work that's going to be necessary to implement these improvements. So that's just kind of an overview. As part of the design process, and in my opinion, one of the benefits of doing the construction manager at risk and bringing the architect and the contractor together early in the project, we were able to value engineer the project and achieve about $785,000 in savings to the project to try to at least minimize the increase as much as possible. With that, I'll be happy to turn it over to them if you have any specific questions before I move on.
Ben, how many of the bad points we were given, how many points are we eliminating with the project?
So I believe that it'll bring it down to virtually zero. I can certainly provide you more detailed information, but that's the
But
goal
we're
of this
addressing
project.
all the concerns, you think?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Question, Mr. McIntosh?
We're dealing with two known entities here, Walter Hobbs County and Pearson and Bloom, and we've done business with them before, and they're valued partners in a lot of stuff that we do. But I'm a little bit confused as to what falls under the at-risk category in a construction manager at risk. Some of this obviously is unforeseen because of rise in prices. I mean, to me, that doesn't seem like that's a risk that the construction manager should bear. But what falls into the category, what they're at risk for?
So I will just share kind of the concept, and then I think Will can perhaps expand on that. But construction manager at risk, basically, we negotiate with the contractor what's called a guaranteed maximum price, meaning that that's the amount that we're going to pay for the project, regardless of whether it comes in above that or below that. So unless the city seeks, scope changes, requests an increase in the guaranteed maximum price. So the risk is, I would say really to the construction manager that if the project cost exceeds that GMP and it's not something that both sides have agreed on, then that is a cost that's more borne by the construction manager as opposed to the owner.
We were hired back.
Would you please give your name and address for the record?
Will Smelser with Bloom Construction. So we were hired in the fall to do pre-construction services to provide budget feedback on the design as it progressed from the state that you see on the screen to what we have now. And I think that was at a cost. I don't have it in front of me. It was a $50,000 or so fee for hiring us to do that, and then with the intent of setting a GMP at this point in the project. So from this point forward, the GMP locks us into a price for the work, and so maybe that answers that question.
That helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Ben, just looking at this thing, is the $6,649,285, that would kind of be the fixed number if all things come out that way?
Well, at this point, that is what we're estimating the cost to be. The guaranteed maximum price is the $5,144,211. So what?
That number.
That's what you all will be approving today as part of the resolution. Will be that.
Gotcha.
But we wanted to provide you the total projected cost because that's what's. I mean, as you can see there, a lot of what's happening with the GMPs was driving the need for the increased funding, but there are other elements that have come into play too, like the increased design costs.
Let me go back to comments you made. The management organization of the club wants a office on site. Is that in this number?
That is not. So
That's a whole different project.
that is, and so I'll go ahead and share with you there that we're calling that phase 3. And our intent there is Walter Hobbs has already started the design on that. But when we get to the point where we can estimate the costs and are we prepared to do another, it'll be basically another GMP separate for that project. We'll come back to council with a resolution awarding the GMP, a budget amendment to appropriate the financing because the team has requested that the city finance the construction of that building with the understanding that they will cover 100% of the cost of that building. And the third item we'd probably bring back is we would look to enter into a separate lease agreement with them specific for just the administration building. But that phase is not reflected.
Different animal.
That's a different animal. Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments?
I do. I
Yes,
have
ma'am. Go ahead.
a question. What I'm seeing that the difference in the cost of all of these required renovations, the total cost is $6,649,285. But then I looked at the, let me see where I saw it. the resolution asking for funds, but it's from the tax levy and ordinance, and it's only $849,290. Where's the other money coming from?
So thank you, Councilmember Scipio. So there are two budget amendments that are part of this item. So the first one, that annual appropriation tax levy ordinance, is transferring a little more than half of the funds from the ballpark fund. If you recall, you all elected to use some of the ARPA replacement revenue to restore the lost revenue that we experienced when the Dash did not pay us during 2020, during the pandemic. So we have that $1.8 million. So we have $1.8 million. You all subsequently did appropriate about $500,000 for us to be able to address major maintenance issues that we do experience over the years and that we're responsible for as the owner of the stadium. So that left about $1.3 million. So what we're proposing is appropriate about $849,000 of that reserve towards this project. And then in that second budget amendment, the project budget ordinance, you'll see the full funding for the increase. The other $800,000, we're proposing that we would increase the LOBS package that you all had approved as part of 22-23, that $55 million, we would increase that by $800,000 to cover that remaining cost.
Thank you. I just didn't see the second one in that attachment, but thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, also, nobody likes the cost increases, but I've read in great detail the work that's been done on it, and then, I mean, things like that, it's a 1,200 square feet of addition. They would run into a water retention system we didn't know was there. New interior spaces require new electrical and mechanical systems there. Electrical requirements require a whole new system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's nothing that kind of slipped through. It's just that once you got into it, they found a lot of different things there. And we don't have choices. If we're going to keep the team, we've got to make these improvements to get it down there. And I think there are 41 cities lost teams, I believe, during the construction period. So we're lucky to be able to keep it.
Sir.
Including Trenton, New Jersey, the capital of New Jersey, which I thought was. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Scipio, I had another question.
I'm trying to understand the graphic that is up there and my understanding of where the ballpark currently is. Can you just show where the current stadium seating is? Because this one I can't see up close. And where is home plate? If you tell me where home plate, then I can get my orientation probably better.
Right there.
So, we have another.
There we go.
Okay.
That's what we want.
Okay, that's a better one.
Except it's upside down.
Oh, thank you. It's upside down. And the red area is the revised area, right? The area being revised.
Well, the areas that you see in color, Councilmember Scipio, I mean, those are the areas that we're focusing on, some that, that first base side, because that's where a lot of those spaces under the stadium reside, that, the clubhouses, where the batting cages will be located.
That's a much better design, thank you.
Yep,
If you could
okay.
send that to us, be great
We
for
can
us
do
to
that.
have it in our packet.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
One other highlight I did want
Yes,
to
sir.
note about the project. It's always been a priority for council to provide opportunity for minority and women business enterprise participation in the project. And one of the, I think, real benefits that we've seen with construction manager at risk, we saw it with the Bowman Gray Stadium project where we had 44% participation. In this one, we are having goals of almost 50%. NWB participation, 46.58% to minority-owned firms and 3.19% to women-owned firms. That does include the joint venture that Frank L. Bloom has with WC Construction, so we're very pleased to see those kind of goals.
Thank you. Is there a motion from a committee member?
Motion to approve.
Second. We have a motion second to approve G3. If you'll please vote when it comes up. Did you not? By vote? There it is. That is approved.
That's good outer space.
Yes, got to go to satellite and back now. By the way, I did not mention at the beginning of the meeting, anything that's approved tonight will be at the the general meeting of the city council next Monday. With that, we will now go to the next item. If the city clerk will please read G4.
Item G4, resolution authorizing the sale of certain city-owned property on Marymount Drive under the provisions of North Carolina General Statute 160A-269, located in the Northwest Ward.
By the way, this was on the consent agenda yesterday in General Government Committee. Mr. King, you have the floor.
I'll be brief. Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Joines, council members. This is a request to sell a city-owned lot. You can see it highlighted. Can you see that on your screens?
Not yet.
Okay. Highlighted in blue there. This is on Marymount Drive, south of Polo Road in the Northwest Ward. It's around 1,700 square feet in size. It's not suitable to build on for our affordable housing purposes. It essentially is a surplus lot. The owner of this house has reached out to staff to purchase this property, so approval of this will start the upset bid process. The tax value on that lot is $1,800. Glad to answer any questions.
Ms. Scipio, go ahead.
Who owns the property in the back of that little remnant? Is it the same property owner that's highlighted?
It is a different owner.
Okay, thank you.
So the highest bidder gets it.
Correct.
Okay, yes.
My only question was, why did we own this lot? And I know probably the answer doesn't lie within this group. Seems like an odd piece of property.
There's a couple little kind of remnant lots you can see along this corridor. Not sure if it was from a right-of-way. I'm not sure what it was from, but there's a couple.
We're not approving the sale, we're approving the process to start, whereas.
That's right.
If the neighbor who's directly in front of that decides it's more valuable to him, then he can outbid and come back and forth. Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on G4. If you'll please vote when it comes up. That is, it's on one of my screens. That is approved. We will now go to G5.
G5, consideration of items regarding permanent financing for 216-unit multifamily rental development known as the Lofts at Motor Road to Winfield Properties, Inc., located in the Northeast Ward.
And this also was presented at General Government yesterday, but if you'll please tell us again.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, members of council. I'm Tanya Skillman. Thank you. I'm Tanya Skillman, Housing Development Manager for the Housing Development Department. This project is presented by Winfield Properties. The developer is here today. They are seeking gap financing in the amount of $6.579 million. As well as acquisition of a city-owned lot in the Northeast Ward for $1. One thing I did present this yesterday, but I also wanted to mention that they have, it's an affordable project with set-asides at 45 of the units will be set aside at 30% AMI, 66 units will be set aside at 50% AMI, area median income, excuse me, I slip into jargon. 105 units will be set aside at 80% AMI, with rents starting for each. The one bedroom start at $394, the 2 bedrooms start at $473, and the 3 bedrooms the rent starts at $541. I think, with that, the below market value for the land will support the project, keeping those rents lower.
Thank you. This was presented yesterday, but are there any additional comments, questions anybody has? Ms. Scipio.
This is such an odd piece of land, the shape of it. Has there been a determination where access will be? Will it be off of Motor Road or Mount Pleasant Drive, or do we know at this point?
Can the developer, would you mind?
Good afternoon, Davis Ray, 5614 Riverdale Drive, Jamestown, North Carolina. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so we do have, and you'll have to forgive my printer ink on this particular site layout, but I wanted to point out that we would have,
Cut the thing on. Here's the thing.
No, it's very technical, but.
Very technical, it's the thing to cut it on.
okay. So just for purposes of obviously transportation and fire, we do have 2 points of access on this particular property. One off of Motor Road, which you would see here, and then the other coming in off of Mount Pleasant.
So that little piece of land off Motor is just wide enough to get your house, your road in there?
Egress.
Yes, so the piece of property off of Motor Road is the balance of the city-owned property as well as this.
Yeah, but you got a little spur that touches,
That's correct.
yeah, just enough to get your road in there.
Yep, sorry about that. I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, gotcha.
That's a beautiful piece of property. Is that a stream that goes down the very middle of it?
There is a stream buffer involved with this site plan. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? It was approved yesterday at General Government, just FYI.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
G5. There's a second.
Thank you, Davis.
Please vote when it comes up. We will now go to, let me just make a comment. Chair will take a bit of privilege here. I got an email today from people questioning why we're selling land for $1. And while it's not on this agenda, yesterday we did 2 private developers, 4 lots each for $1. We're not giving land to people so they can go do what they want with it. Ms. Carmen, would you just comment briefly on the 8 lots that we sold yesterday for $1 and the requirements that people have to meet, et cetera?
I'd be happy to, Chairman Clark. Each of the sales, the purchase contracts include provisions regarding the time frame for constructing the houses as well as the design of each of the houses, and has clawbacks such that if the developer does not complete the construction within the 24-month time period, the property and everything on it comes back to the city. And once the properties are sold to a home developer, or home buyer rather, the deed actually has restrictions in it, making sure the property is maintained in compliance with the housing code and various other codes of the city. And there are also some clawback provisions in the deed to the home buyer.
Yeah. And the same thing here, the land is sold for $1, but sir, what's the total estimated cost of this project? Yeah, so if you got $42 million and you want to build something affordable housing, give us a call. We'll be happy to talk to you.
And I'd also like to mention that those restrictions in terms of affordability for multifamily is a 30-year requirement, and for a single family, it's a 15-year requirement.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. So did we vote on that?
I didn't see it come up. I think you did.
Yes. For G5?
Yeah.
It's information.
Councilor Taylor.
Wait a minute, I've lost my place, just a minute. We did vote on that? Okay, I thought we did. We will now go to G6.
Item G6, information on an allocation of $2,158,000 state ARPA funds to Habitat for Humanity of Forsyth County for development and construction of 13 houses in the historic Happy Hill neighborhood located in the East Ward.
Now, this is for information only today, as it was yesterday. Please.
Yes. Good evening, Chair Clark, Mayor Jones, and members of the committee and council. Yes, this was presented yesterday as well as an information item. This is a little different than our traditional gap financing for affordable housing. The request comes to actually fully fund 13 homes in the Happy Hill Gardens neighborhood. It is a historically Black neighborhood in our community, has quite a bit of history. A lot of advocates showed up yesterday in support of this item, but one thing they want to make sure is that the homes remain affordable and there's no gentrification aspects in this request. So we are partnering with Habitat for Humanity. They are willing to build the 13 homes. The request fully funds these homes. What it also does is frees up a restrictive covenant that Housing Authority has with HUD for a previous Hope 6 project. And so this allows for the restrictions to be freed so that the community can participate in building out the full neighborhood or being a part of the Happy Hill Gardens development. So the request is for $2.158 million. This is up to that dollar amount. We estimated about $166,000 per home. That would include potentially any aesthetic enhancements, including garages or anything, because these are quite large lots that would accommodate some enhancements to Habitat's standard home, which they actually can build for around $140,000, $150,000 per home. And so these also would be used with state ARPA dollars. What I'll say is with these dollars, they are on a timetable, and so we don't have the time to spend these dollars like we do with our ARPA replacement dollars. Senator Paul Lowe advocated for these funds and intended for it to be for single-family homes, and so he is supportive of this opportunity to use these funds in this manner. And so it is more than we typically do for gap financing, but Habitat for Humanity is a not-for-profit organization. We are now trying to structure our other deals where it's loans and with like a 2% interest back to the city. In this case, since this is a not-for-profit organization, we would offer this as a grant, and any funding back, mortgage payments that the homeowner would make back to Habitat is then reinvested in community and into other projects. What I'll also say is that they actually spend a great deal of time preparing people for home ownership. So they have to attend classes for months so that they build the capacity for long-term home ownership. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I move for approval. Well, this is an information item.
Just more information. Yes, I made the comment that I have concerns about the fact this is all a grant. I think what I find with this is we're just missing a lot of information. I'd like to know what it's actually going to cost Habitat and what their stack is, because part of their stack usually includes in-kind labor, or whatever you want to call it, sweat equity or whatever it may be, by volunteers that do various things. I'd like to know that. I'd like to know what they anticipate selling them for, and what the term, and I believe typically they provide the mortgage to the buyer, what the terms of that mortgage are, et cetera. Just all the detail of all this, how they will go about selecting the people that will go into them, just all that type stuff. And any elevations or typicals would be nice too, particularly if it is going to have a different look than a typical Habitat house. I think we just need a lot more detail to know what we're getting.
Well, we have representatives here if you would.
Well, you can provide all that
Okay, I can
in
provide
writing later. Mr. McIntosh.
Should I also get a list of what other projects have been brought to us or in the pipeline, or who could benefit from that same pot of money, that same pot of ARPA money? Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mundy.
Just for education purposes, Happy Hill, I'm familiar with the entire area. Is Happy Hill Gardens a subset of the larger piece called Happy Hill, or is it all one and the same?
It's all one and the same. Sometimes people say Happy Hill, but it's Happy Hill Gardens.
Okay, thank you.
Correction, Happy Hill Gardens was the public housing
Portion,
of the whole area called Happy Hill. The whole area was the former plantation in Salem, but the gardens refers to the public housing that was taken down in 2000.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yep. So this is information only, and again, Ms. Tony, you can provide that next time we see this. Thank you. We will now go to the last item, G6. By the way, for the council members up here. G7, excuse me. We are all invited to the Chamber annual meeting tonight, and we will be finished in time for all of us to make it, so don't worry. We'll now go to G7.
Item G7, information on Piedmont Triad Regional Council's Bridging the 52 Divide application to the United States Department of Transportation's Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods Grant Program, and city consideration of a support letter and local match contribution.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor, sir.
Mayor Joines, members of the committee and council, Jeff Ansler, Director of Transportation. So the item before you really is to call attention to the Bridging 52 Divide application. And so the Piedmont Triad Regional Council, in partnership with Creative Corridors Coalition, are jointly applying for a planning grant to the United States Department of Transportation, as mentioned, entitled Reconnecting or Bridging the 52 Divide, excuse me. And the program that they're applying for is called RCN, short for Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods. And so before you today really is this project to pursue a planning grant to supplement an NCDOT planned project of replacing the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street bridges over US 52. So there's a critical component of this in partnering with NCDOT on a pre-scheduled planned project for those bridge replacements over US 52. I've mentioned those bridge replacements that are currently funded and scheduled in the State Transportation Improvement Program for right-of-way in 2025 and construction year of 2026. So just to kind of put the perspective into that timeline. But, you know, in viewing these scheduled bridge replacement as, you know, as potential opportunities to address some of those issues across 52, PTRC and Creative Corridors thought the opportunity to present itself to apply for this grant. And so you may recall that this is the second iteration of this that we have brought forward to this committee. Well, the second iteration of this grant application. So last year we were unsuccessful, but we did have a support letter of $20,000 for this initiative. And this year the ask is up to $30,000. And so I wanted to take a moment to explain some of those financials. With what we learned from our debriefing session on the last iteration of this is we have grown the scope. Well, you know, the application is increasing its scope to include more neighborhood engagement, and then really an additional phase of this effort would be to include some more planning efforts around conceptual design, costing, cost estimations, and trying to do what they're calling their implementation analysis of understanding what it would cost and what it would actually be from a feasibility perspective. Those are the two critical changes of this. So total ask of this grant is just over $700,000 to the tune of $733,000 with an 80-20 projected split, 80% being $586,960 of the federal piece with a local match of $146. There are a number of partners that PTRC and Creative Corridors have engaged with this to contribute towards that local match, with the city's contribution. And what we're rolling out as information tonight is the $30,000 in support. So I wanted to call attention that, you know, I've mentioned this is really contingent on being able to coordinate with NCDOT and their bridge replacement program. And there's a lot of challenges in making sure that we can coordinate schedules. Additionally, this is just for the planning of this, and wanted to call attention to the study, and if successful in this effort, would result in a future need of construction dollars and implementation dollars and further coordination with NCDOT, all having to adhere to that construction schedule. So that's just wanted to be transparent with this body that we have to make sure that we're aligning our efforts with NCDOT and our current capacity on staff to make sure that we can facilitate the successful application. So we don't want to be left kind of, for lack of a better term, holding the bag on this one, not be able to cash out any recommendations that would come forth, because it would have to result in some substantial effort on the back end to make sure that we're applying for future fundings to implement. And so wanted to make sure that distinction. Again, this is a for information item, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm here for the pleasure of the chair.
I have some questions. I guess I'll start. The project, is the way I understand it, is you're going to fill in all the areas between the bridges. Is that correct?
We don't know yet.
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
I thought what we were doing was taking bridges and what's the goal, I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't think we know that exactly yet, Councilmember Clark. I think that is what this planning grant will engage the community to come up with a design that could or couldn't be that. I don't think we know that for certain today.
Right. To expand on that, the idea here is what's known as the NCDOT Bridge Replacement Project, and this effort would be to how to use that to supplement that project to engage both sides of US 52, and how do we reconnect back. So there's a lot of public outreach trying to solve that.
It's one thing to supplement or maybe enhance the beauty or whatever you want, functionality of the bridges. There's another thing to fill in the spaces between them. which is what Boston did when they buried their interstate. I have been to Columbia, South Carolina, and I know through the University of South Carolina's campus, they buried a road. The only reason I bring that looks to me to be an astronomically expensive project. And I want some order of magnitude of what this is going to cost. And is there federal money, state money at the end of the rainbow? I mean, given the cost of a bridge, if you were to fill all that in between, is it unreasonable to think that could be $50 million?
The projects that you referenced, Councilmember Clark, certainly the Big Dig through Boston, that was the most expensive infrastructure project in America, and burying that highway was super expensive. Philadelphia's done it, Seattle's done it, I believe Dallas, Texas has done it. If you were to go in and basically fill in those gaps in between the bridges, everybody can see that. So if you were to go in and fill those voids between 5th and 4th and then 4th and 3rd, yeah, that's a very expensive project. And even though there may be state or federal dollars out there, the local match to go with that is going to be a sizable amount of money. Now, I don't know that we can sit here and tell you exactly what that is today, but that would be a good chunk of local dollars to match for that.
Well, what's the question we're asking the folks to answer is what I'm getting at. Is that the question we're asking?
And Chairman Clark, that's part of what this study would address, is this application for these dollars would be to do a lot of public engagement to see what their vision would be. And so to Aaron's, Assistant City Manager King's point, we don't know today what the ask is, and that's part of what this first implementation grant would analyze is to what the possibilities could be and engage the public to get their feedback on what it could be.
Well, I just wanted on the record ahead of time that I could never support a project that's going to be expensive as I think this is going to be. Mr. King, how many projects do we have on our 1, 2, and 3 list?
I don't know about 3. This came up at Public Works earlier. Chair Clark, so I do have some numbers. Tier 1, you have 101 projects. Tier 2, you have 196 for a total of 297. Now, a handful of those have fallen off since February, but that gives you an order of magnitude.
We have 297 projects right now on the, and those are funded, I believe, or some of them are funded.
Largely. Now, we may have to come back to amend some budgets given the amount of time it's going to complete those, but largely funded, yes.
And I understand we have oodles of bridges in town that need fixing that aren't funded.
I think Keith Huff maintains kind of we'll call it a top 10 list that you really don't want to be on. And so we have replaced some bridges, Novak being one of those. Novak fell off and we've had some others on there. If you were to take the city's, call it 10-ish bridges that need some work, you're looking at about $28 million, of which there's probably $10 to $15 million of unfunded bridge repairs and replacements in that $28 million. So you don't have enough money to pay for the 10-ish you have on the list now, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is I will not approve anything that sets its goal of coming up with a $100 million project. Now, if we want to enhance the bridges to make them more connectable, that's one thing, but I am concerned we're giving a blank piece of paper to people and they're going to come back with something that's just, the Boston project, I think, was $15, $20 billion to bury a couple of miles of interstate. I mean, I serve my constituents as everybody else does, and if we have bridges that are falling apart and the 297 projects that are already on there, those to me take priority over burying 52. Now, if we want to improve these bridges, that's fine, because the state's already paying for them anyway.
Councilmember Clark, I think that's a little bit of the reason why we brought this back. You now have your resolution that council adopted on February 27th of last year. And so basically the new projects and new project planning services require an action from council. So that's why we're kind of bringing this back. This was not on tier 1, 2, or 3 that you adopted in February. So that's a little bit of why staff brought this back.
I guess I'm saying I want to be sure if the wording is such that when they start this, that it has to do with enhancing bridge, not spending $100 million or whatever it could be. And somebody's got to convince me of that before we start the process.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. We'll get there.
Beyond the $30,000 that we're being requested to put into the hat here, what else will be required of staff time and any other expenditures that will be required from our already overloaded staff?
Councilmember McIntosh, fair question, and those responsibilities have really yet to be defined. Likely joint efforts, obviously a lot of coordination with the applicants, a lot of coordination with NCDOT, and then since this is, of course, there's a lot of city interest in this, certainly City DOT will have a key stake in this as well. So that's to be determined, but there will be some level for sure.
I worry that our willingness to spend $30,000 signals willingness to spend lots more of staff and money on a project. So to me, $30,000 is not a lot of money, but it could turn into a huge expenditure down the road. And we won't know until the study comes back to us what the expectation is or what the scope of the project is. So I'm torn on it.
Ms. Scipio.
Yes. First of all, this is a federal grant that was set up specifically to address division in cities based on segregation, urban renewal that disconnected cities. It's specifically for a specific need and addressing. It just so happens, which is really great, that the state is going to replace the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street bridges, and we are not having to pay for that completely. That is wonderful. But this particular grant is a call to the community to come together and create ideas on how we can reconnect the east and west side of Winston-Salem because of the construction of Highway 52 that created a major division in this city. So the federal dollars are many pots. And again, I'm telling you, I'm an advocate for federal dollars. There is money also set aside for implementing ideas that communities come up with. There has been someone who floated this idea of covering up the spaces between 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street Bridge. That is not the going-in concept. The concept is to bring community people together to come up with a community idea. And Piedmont Triad Council is actually asking for this grant, but they have assembled about, I would say, over 50 community partners to come together and speak to what we can do as a community. And we're asking for the city to support the project if we get the grant with a match for the planning of this. It's an extensive plan to bring in lots of community together to come up with an idea for this particular grant. So Mr. Larson wanted to speak.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, as I understand, it's a two-part process. One is the planning process, which we applied for last year and came in actually just under the line, under the cut. It was just really close. And the second process was actually then an implementation based on whatever comes out of the first phase. I hear Mr. Clark's concern about we don't know what that amount is going to be yet. And as we go into the process, you know, value engineering and looking at the design and thinking about realistically what we want to accomplish, part of this deals with other aspects of knitting the community together, not simply 3 bridges, but we think about the creative corridors and what they accomplished with the Salem Parkway project and how it's united the north and the south part of the city. And we think that it has an opportunity now to do the same thing with the east and west, which is long overdue. So I think all representatives here from Creative Corridors, if you'd like to, maybe they could talk with people that are actually writing the grant. They'd like to speak about the scope of the work, but right now the intent is to create a connector between the east and western part of the city, and this is what the federal money is used to do for us.
Is there someone here who would like to speak? Well, come on up. I can't see that far. I don't have my contacts in today. Y'all gonna have to come up. Whoever wants to speak, please give your name and address for the record and speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chairman Clark, Christy Williams, address Louisville, North Carolina. And I'm the chair of the board for Creative Corridors Coalition. Elise Barella will also present. And thank you all for welcoming us here today.
Hi, Elise Barella, 917 Schober Street, Winston-Salem. I'm a board member for Creative Corridors and have assisted in writing the proposal last year, as well as the revision this year. And I am happy to answer some questions. I think that Mr. Fandler did a good job of sharing the overview, and the other council members provided some important details. Just to address one question in particular, as far as implementation, the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program has billions of dollars available for construction, which we would be able to reapply for, depending on what the outcome of the planning process is and what the need in terms of additional infrastructure or programming investments would be.
I just want you folks to be aware, and I will say you do not have a good record in this area of understanding the budget constraints of this city, and we've only got so much money to do certain things. And I got 297 projects right now that I don't have enough engineering help to do it. I got bridges everywhere that aren't even funded yet. So I need some realism, is what I'm getting at. And I haven't seen it traditionally from your organization. So I will just leave it at that.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
So Pat Ivey with NCDOT, many of you are familiar with him. Basically, they'll be going to 3 lanes, going both directions. When the 6 lanes are there, the bridges will have to be redone. There are federal dollars that are available, and part of the process is if we receive this grant as part of discerning what that will look like, it will make the additional federal dollars available. I was just with a congressman in Colorado just a couple weeks ago, and he said that there would be a lot of interest in our particular area in funding this type of project. And I'm mentioning that because our city has to redo this area. You either do it with content and input, and always, as part of your recommendations, the next part of the process is always what the city council believes. We aren't the deciders of anything. We merely engage community and other resources. Certainly, the evidence of other projects, I'm sorry to say that there are some beautiful things that we've brought to the City of Arts Innovation that sets us apart. We've gotten 10 awards on a national and local basis. If we look at this as an engine for the beauty of our city and what it's brought in terms of not only tourism, but economic development, I have to say, after traveling across the country in the last 10 days because of moving my niece, that our city shows well. And that says a lot for who wants to invest in our city on an entrepreneurial basis, but also on an economic business building basis. Our city sells, and part of it is the investment that our community made, both the city, nonprofits, the public sector, and the grants that we received. We work tirelessly as a volunteer organization to bring beautiful things to our city with the context of what would be good counsel from you. So we don't work independently.
Okay, you got to raise $146,000 for this, right? For this first phase, if we did the math. Is that right?
The required match, when we put in the proposal, if we are required to have a 20% match, would be $146,000. That is not just cash, that can also be in kind.
But that's the number I'm talking about. Is Pat Ivey giving you any state money for that?
Yes.
How much is he giving?
They are working on the same amount or more as last year, which was $30,000.
And how about the county?
The county did not provide last year.
Okay, thank you. It is my understanding that time is of the essence on this. Is that correct?
The application is due at the end of the month.
Which is end of the month?
September, yes.
Today's the 12th or something. I was just going to suggest this is within the auspices of the city manager to approve without us.
I think the funding amount is, Councilmember Clark. I think we'd have to reconcile the resolution that you adopted in February 27th that says council needs to commit to any changes to the tier 1 and tier 2 priorities. I think that needs to be reconciled by city council. Under $100,000 can be signed off on by the city manager.
So we need to take something off that list to put this on.
That was the original intent when we
Okay.
brought that to you.
Why don't you do it for Monday night? Find $30,000 worth of projects and take them off one or two, and we'll vote if at that point, if that's okay with everybody.
Works for me.
Yeah. Chair Clark, I do have a question. The amount in question is $30,000 at this point in time. And that $30,000 does not commit us to any additional staff time or spending. Is that correct?
I think there is going to be some staff time.
There will be. So somebody from City DOT will have to be involved in the process and participate in those meetings and attend those meetings. So there will definitely be a staff commitment from City DOT, as you heard Jeff allude to earlier.
Okay, so that's not in the construction and going forward, that's actually in bringing the community together.
And as we go to, if this is done, then you go to an engineering phase and construction. As we go to each one, we will have to take more things off that list to come up with money. Come up with a recommendation for Monday night, and we'll just see how the votes fall. How about that?
Fair enough.
Okay, everybody got that? Come back Monday night, we're going to vote on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the last item. Is there anything else to bring forward, committee?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to continue to make a statement that we have great needs in this city. We got all of those bridges. There are dollars already designated for communities. And I still want to advocate that we must think about doing things differently than the way we are doing them to get those dollars and use them for our community. They're going untapped, and we need to be creative and go out and get resources that help us think through how can we get those federal dollars to actually pay for our needs. And saying that we don't have capacity is not enough. We must find a way, because those bridges are going to still not be done 20 years from now. But we need to be thoughtful and move forward creatively in how we get things done for our city when the money is there. I don't want to cry because we didn't make the effort to get the money that's there.
Mr. King will come up with a recommendation for Monday night.
And Chair Clark, I'm going to echo those. I'm very tired of telling constituents in the community at large that we don't have the resources. We can't burn out our current folks, but we've got to figure out a way to move forward.
Well,
because we're just not, and that's not fair to the constituents that any of us represent. I'm not saying these folks have to do it. I'm saying we as a city have to figure out a way to get around the new normal, which is fewer people working for us.
Well, what we did is we put together a list with 297 projects, and one of them's coming off Monday night.
Which one?
That's up to him to decide. Okay, we are adjourned.
No pressure.